Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
How are you today?
Fine. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
I'm Tonya Golbricht.
And how do you spell your name for the record?
First name is Tonya. Last name is Golbricht.
Thank you. And what do you do, ma'am?
I am a deputy for the Plata County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. How long have you been with the Plata County Sheriff's Office?
Approximately 18 years.
All right. And you actually took a little time away from the Sheriff's Office, is that right?
Yes.
And when was that?
In 2017 to 2018.
Okay. And prior to departing in 2017, what was your rank?
I was a lieutenant of the criminal investigations unit.
And as a lieutenant, what were your responsibilities?
Supervising the investigators and criminal investigations, and I also took cases and on call.
And why did you leave? Just briefly.
I thought I was ready to retire.
Okay. Did you end up returning back to the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, I did.
And within the Sheriff's Department, when you return, even after a short absence, do you retain your rank, or is that not mandatory?
No, I started back at the bottom on patrol.
And that's why you're currently a deputy?
Yes.
So back in 2012, what was your role within the Plata County Sheriff's Department?
I was a sergeant investigator, and I handled cases.
Okay. Did you have any involvement in this case involving Dylan Redwine's disappearance?
Yes.
What was your role?
I was a supporting investigator. Usually when cases like this come out, it's all hands on deck.
Okay. And you're sort of soft-spoken, as I'm sure you know, so if you wouldn't mind just making sure to scoot in just a little closer if you can, or just speak louder into the microphone.
Okay.
There we go, that's better. Tell us about how your involvement in this case began.
Well, I initially wasn't in town when this all started. I was on vacation. When I returned, my first involvement was with a meeting with some of Dylan's family.
And who did you meet with?
It was Elaine Redwine, Corey Redwine, and his then girlfriend, Crystal Gilliam, I believe is how she pronounces her last name.
Okay. Was Mike Hall present in any of those early meetings?
Not this first one.
Okay. And early on in this investigation, did you take any steps to investigate Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, and Mike Hall?
Yes.
What steps did you take to investigate them?
I confirmed their alibis.
And how did you do that?
I contacted their supervisors, co-workers, and collected receipts.
Okay. And did you, at the end of that process, what was your conclusion regarding their potential involvement in Mr. Redwine's?
Hold on.
The basis for this answer flows from hearsay. If she contacted coworkers, supervisors, and even the receipts, Your Honor.
But this goes to explain why they weren't investigated further as suspects, is my understanding. It's not the truth of the matter asserted, correct? So
Well,
why would that be a hearsay objection?
Well, the reason for its admission is different than the substance of the evidence itself, which is hearsay. Just
Right.
because hearsay explains something.
No. The reason for the admission is part of the hearsay rule, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Offered for the truth of the matter asserted is the back end of the hearsay rule.
Right.
It's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's not hearsay.
I-
Rule.
Hearsay within hearsay.
Well, you've got hearsay within something else, but not hearsay within hearsay. Go ahead, Mr. Champagne.
At the end of your investigation into the alibis of Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, and Mike Hall, what conclusions did you draw regarding their involvement in Dylan Redwine's disappearance?
Objection relevance, her conclusions regarding this are not for the jury's determination.
Did you want to stipulate that they had nothing to do with this?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you want to stipulate they had nothing to do with this?
I'm confused by the court's question.
Well, you're saying this is irrelevant. It's
Correct.
relevant if they're suspects. Or if you want to stipulate that they have nothing to do with Dylan disappearing, that's fine, then we'll move on.
I think that's I think the way the court's framing it respectfully is a macro issue. I think asking an investigator, what were your conclusions as to these investigative issues regarding these players, is ultimately a determination of fact to be made by the jury.
Which is allowed by the rules. So you made a relevance objection.
Right.
If you're willing to stipulate that the Halls and Corey had nothing to do with it, then it's irrelevant. Otherwise, it's relevant.
I'm not going to make that stipulation, nor am I not making that stipulation.
It's relevant. Go ahead.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Were you able to, at the end of your investigation into the alibis of those three people, were you able to draw any conclusions about their involvement in the disappearance of Dylan Redwine?
Yes,
What was your conclusion?
that they weren't in the area when Dylan went missing.
Did you clear them as suspects?
Yes,
During your early stages of the investigation, you said that you met with the Halls and Mr. Redwine, Corey Redwine?
just Elaine, Corey, and Crystal first initially.
And tell us about that meeting, without getting into what everybody said. What was the purpose of the meeting and where was it held, that sort of thing?
It was sort of a briefing and to kind of talk with the family, get to know Dylan a little bit more, what kind of things he was into doing. We got descriptions of potential clothing and cell phone, iPhone, or iPods, stuff that might be on him.
Do you recall the date of that meeting?
I believe it was November 23rd, 2012.
And was that the first time that you'd met these folks?
Yes.
How would you describe their demeanor during this meeting?
They were stressed, tired, honestly looked a little dirty, very tired, overwhelmed.
Okay.
Everything I would imagine somebody would look like in that situation.
Okay. Was there any crying during that meeting?
Yes,
From who?
mainly Elaine.
Other displays of emotion besides crying that you can recall?
Yes, there was some anger.
During these early days of the investigation, did you have contact with Mark Redwine as well?
No,
During these early days of the investigation, did you make effort to contact some of Dylan's friends and classmates?
yes.
How did that occur?
We called in, we got a group of CBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and Federal Bureau of Investigations. They came in to help, and I was assigned to partner up with another FBI agent, and we went to the Bayfield Middle School to talk to friends and classmates.
And how many folks did you think you talked to during that time?
10, 12.
All right. What type of questions were you asking those folks without getting into their answers?
What kind of kid Dylan was, what did he enjoy to do with his free time, what was his, was he a happy kid, was he a sad kid, was he a depressed kid, did you ever know him to run away, did you ever know of him, we asked about his cell phone use and contact, what his relationship was with his family, general stuff like that. And if they had heard from him since he was reported missing.
And had they?
No.
Do you recall the names of the people that you spoke to?
Some of them.
Okay, who do you recall?
Ryan Nava, Fernando Stubbs, Wesley Rayburn, Garrett Donahue, Skyla Ribel, Carolyn Cook, Tristan Reeves. I'm probably missing some, but that's who I can remember off the top of my head.
Was Dylan, did he have a reputation of being a pretty frequent communicator?
Yes.
Objection, hearsay.
Mr., well, I don't know that it's hearsay. Talking about reputation.
Foundation then, as well.
Well, she just talked to people who would know him, so there's foundation right there. Do you have
Right.
any other objections?
Right, and this information flows from the hearsay statement of those folks.
Reputation comes from hearsay.
Right.
Right.
That's
And
the
and
objection.
there's a specific rule about it. So far, you're overruled. Go ahead, Mr.
Was he known as a pretty frequent communicator among this group of people?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, had any of Dylan's friends or family heard from him after November 18th, 2012?
No.
Did you have any role in collecting phone records in this case?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall whose phone records you were seeking?
I was seeking Mark Redwine's, Dylan Redwine's, and Ryan Nava's.
Okay. And this may be a question that you may or may not know the answer to right off the top of your head. Do you recall the phone numbers that you were seeking? And it's okay if you don't.
I do not.
Okay. Would it help refresh your recollection to look at some of your supplemental reports?
Probably.
All right. One moment, please. I may approach supplement number 146 on page 190, Council?
146?
Correct. Take a look at this and see if this helps to refresh your recollection.
Yes, it does. I probably can't memorize them that fast, though.
That's okay. Let me ask you a little bit about the process. What was the process that you went about in trying to get these phone records?
Well, we were pretty sure that there was important information that could be learned from these devices. And with past experience, I know that writing search warrants for cell phone records can take a lot of time. So I put requests in for exigent purposes so we could get the information faster.
What does exigent circumstances mean, just briefly?
It's still a document that you fill out. You put in that it's under exigent circumstances, like a missing child, someone that's in grave danger. They will provide those records promptly.
Do you later follow up with a search warrant or court order for those records?
Yes, I did production of records for all the exigent search warrants I wrote.
Okay.
To satisfy those.
And did you get records relating to telephone number, one moment please, ending in 5448 from Verizon?
Yes,
And do you know whose phone number that was?
that was Dylan Redwine's phone.
Did you get records from AT&T for a telephone number ending in 8032?
Yes,
And do you know what records that related to? What
Mark
person?
Redwine, sorry.
I'm sorry, what person that related to?
Mark Redwine.
And do you know whether that was his personal phone number or a work phone or home phone? Do you know anything?
I believe it's his personal phone.
Okay. And did you get records from AT&T ending in telephone number 8303?
Yes,
And can you tell us what phone number what person that number associates to.
Brian Nava.
If I might come and collect that document. Did you also seek out phone records relating to Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, and Mike Hall?
No, I did not.
Are you aware of whether they actually gave their records to law enforcement?
Actually, they voluntarily handed their devices over to our IT department to be downloaded, so I didn't have to write warrants for them.
One moment. Have you ever heard of the term in law enforcement known as a tower dump?
Yes.
What is a tower dump? Please describe that for the jury.
A tower dump is when a tower is dumped, it provides information for all cell phones that are in a certain area where those towers are located. It provides information for those cell phones in a certain period of time that it's requested.
And did you request a tower dump in this case?
Yes.
And which tower were you seeking records from?
There was one for AT&T and one for, I believe it's called Newstar/ComNet. Is that, no.
Why did you seek records from those towers?
Those were the towers that were located in Vicedo area.
Are there other towers, to your knowledge, in 2012, were there other towers in that area?
No,
Those are the only two towers up there.
that I was aware of.
Okay. Did you in fact receive those records that you sought, both for the phones and for the tower dump?
Yes,
And did you review those records yourself?
some of them.
Okay. Did you find any evidence of any communication from Dylan Redwine after November 18th, 2012?
No.
As part of your work in this case, were you able to isolate or identify a telephone number belonging to Mark Redwine's attorney?
Yes.
And how did you go about that?
That was an interesting experience. I found the phone number in Mark's records for November 19th, 2012. I wanted to find out who that phone number belonged to, and I had our crime analyst run the number in a search system that we have. And it came back to a woman that didn't end up being who we were looking for. And I went back and looked at the number, and I had transposed the last two, or the crime analyst transposed the last two numbers, and it just happened to, that was his attorney's number,
How did you know it was his attorney's number?
because I called the number.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with that person?
Yes, I did, and I called asking, I think I was looking for a woman by the name of Beverly McAllister, and I asked for that person. This woman on the other line said, no, you have the wrong number, and I said, okay, and hung up. And then I'm looking at the number, and I asked her how long she had had the phone, and she said 1.5 years. So I was confused. I went back and looked at the number that our crime analyst had ran and saw that the last two numbers were split. So then I called her back again, and I advised who I was, why I was calling her, and asked if she knew who Mark Redwine was. And she said that she didn't feel comfortable talking about that.
Okay. Were you able to determine eventually that this was her attorney, his attorney, excuse me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to change topics with you. We're going to talk briefly, well, for a couple of minutes about tips and tips that may have come into law enforcement in the early stages and throughout the case. Did you receive any tips regarding this case?
Yes.
And how would you describe the volume of tips in the early stages?
They were coming in waves, lots of tips.
Okay. How did law enforcement go about handling these tips?
They would be assigned to investigators, patrol deputies. We even pulled somebody off patrol to come and handle just tips. So they just kind of got divvied up between people that had time to do it.
Do you know how many tips came in over the course of this case?
906 plus.
Plus, meaning more than 906?
I imagine there's more, but at least 906.
At least 906, okay. Were some of those tips that came in from psychics?
Yes.
And how did you treat those types of tips?
We treated all the tips the same,
Why is that?
because if I ever found myself sitting here for this case, I wanted to be able to confidently say that we did everything we could.
Do you recall a tip regarding a sighting of Dylan Redwine in Moriarty, New Mexico?
Yes,
Was that, to your knowledge, was that tip run to ground?
yes,
Run to ground. That's fine. And do you recall a tip coming in from a local gas station?
vaguely.
Okay, what do you remember about that?
I remember somebody calling in a tip saying that they thought they saw Mark and Dylan in an altercation at the gas station. Maybe Mark pulling Dylan into a vehicle, but it was later determined that that wasn't, it was different people, not Mark, not Dylan.
Okay. Do you remember a tip coming in from a woman by the name of Angela Lee?
Yes,
Tell us about that.
she is a postal worker that works in Vicedo, and she believes that she,
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, we will have additional witnesses coming in. I believe defense probably will too, to discuss this matter. My purpose in requesting the basic outlines of this information was to describe the investigative steps taken by Investigator Golbricht to track this tip down.
So it's being offered to show why this part of the investigation occurred?
Yes, Your Honor.
You're not believing that this is correct?
That is also true.
So it's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, is that correct?
Yes.
Then it's not hearsay.
It's being offered to rebut. Permission to make a record at the bench, because Your Honor doesn't like it when we get into our factual hypotheses.
I know exactly what you're going at. I think it makes sense to have it at this now. You can still do what you intend to do. I mean, we've had hearings on this issue, not specifically whether or not how it would be addressed by the DA, so I'm going to allow it to go forward. And I don't think you need to come make a record.
And I'd ask,
It's pretty obvious what you've done. If you want to make a record at the end of the day, you can.
my other request is that it not be characterized as a tip, as we've all spoken about just now. This was a full-blown investigation regarding this information from Angela Lee, not a tip on the phone. I think that misrepresents the state of the evidence.
Didn't it come, that I don't know. They can refer to it how they want. You can refer to it as you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can
And
you
in
give...
fact, I don't want to do it at the end of the day. I know my court reporter has to be somewhere. So that's the problem. Why don't you come up and make your record? But if you're going to come up, I want you to come up.
Investigator Golbricht, we're going to get into that topic at a later time. So I'm going to shift topics with you. I want to talk with you a little bit about searches and searches that were done in the case. Can you describe the search efforts that were made in the early part of the investigation to the best of your knowledge?
On Middle Mountain?
As you see fit. Just some of the searches at the beginning from what you recall.
Okay. Well, we did a lot of little searches here and there, some of them based off tips, some off of other reasons. But in the early stages on Middle Mountain, we started, myself and Roy Vreeland were at the very bottom of Middle Mountain, and we did about 8-mile search at the bottom.
And do you recall that search occurring in May of 2013?
Yes.
And do you recall, you said the bottom of Middle Mountain, kind of, is there a particular road or area that was part of that search?
Yes, it's called Tucker Lane, and it's towards the end of the road. We parked and searched that area.
Okay. If I showed you a map of that area, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Exhibit 500. Does that look familiar?
Yes.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of that search?
Yes, it is.
Move to introduce Exhibit 500.
Any objection?
No objection.
It'll be admitted.
Thank you. Motion to publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you show the jury what we're talking about here?
Yes.
There's a pointer, and if you're going to stand up, please speak into the microphone next to the television.
Okay, the area that was
The pointer
searched.
extends to, if you want.
This area highlighted here in like this pinkish purple color is where we searched that day.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
That's fine. Did you find any items of evidence related to the case in that search?
No.
You can have a seat. Did you participate in a search of Middle Mountain in June of 2013?
Yes.
Can you tell us about how that search came together, the plan behind it?
Well, we put together groups of people that consisted of law enforcement, so Plata County Sheriff's Office, Durango Police Department, Durango Fire, Upper Pine, Search and Rescue, and other private search agencies that were willing to help.
And if I showed you a map, a topographical map of that area, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Before I go there, just a very brief foundational question. Were there, in fact, remains relating to Dylan Redwine found during those searches?
Yes.
If I may approach with Exhibit 224, please.
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And how would you describe it?
It is a map of the Vicedo area, and it depicts Mark's house, Middle Mountain Road, and some of our search area.
Okay. Is it a fair and accurate description of what it displays?
Yes.
Move to admit Peoples 224.
No objection.
224 is admitted.
Permission to publish?
Yes.
There's a circle on the left side of the map with a text box. What does that text box display in that circle?
Mark Redwine's house.
And then towards the center and above the previous circle, there's a circle and a text box. What does that display?
The recovery site, the first recovery site
First recovery
for
site?
Dylan's remains.
Okay. And Investigator Golbricht, are you familiar with how to interpret topographical maps?
Somewhat.
Okay. How would you describe this area where the remains were found, the first recovery site?
Steep, rugged, lot of ground cover, down trees, loose boulders, treacherous in parts.
And we see a red line that is traveling through the screen. What's on that red line?
That is Middle Mountain Road.
We also see a purple line that intersects with that red line. What does that denote? To your knowledge. If you don't know, that's fine.
That's the entry point, Bear Creek entry point, I believe.
Let me ask you this question. On Middle Mountain Road, there at the recovery site, is there also an ATV trail that intersects?
Yes,
Is that consistent with where that purple line is located?
yes.
Is there a gate on Middle Mountain Road below the recovery site, number one?
There is,
Is that red arrow consistent with the location of the gate?
yes.
As we look at that map, we see the circle, the top right quadrant of that circle seems to be covering an area where the lines are coming much closer together. What does that indicate to you?
Steep. It gets steeper.
And is that how you recall that area when you were there in person?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about the search on in June of 2013. Do you recall when it began?
The date?
The date.
The 24th, I believe,
Okay.
23rd.
Would it help? Do you remember, or you're not sure?
I'm not sure.
Oh, that's
We did
fine.
a lot of searches.
Okay, that's fine. Would it help to look at your report?
Sure. Actually, I believe it was the 22nd through the 26th.
The 22nd through the 26th?
And then there was one search before that on the 21st. That was just Roy and I.
Okay. Did the search on the 21st produce any evidence related to the case?
No,
And on the 22nd, did the search produce evidence relevant to the case?
yes.
What occurred on the 22nd, to your recollection?
A black Nike Jordan shoe and a youth size 7 was located, and a Fila sock.
What was done with those items after they were found?
They were documented and collected, and then they were presented to Mike Hall and Corey Redwine for identification.
Were you present when that occurred?
Yes,
Can you describe how that process played out?
they did not touch the items, but they did look at them and positively ID'd them as belonging to Dylan.
How would you describe their demeanor during this interaction?
At first in shock, and emotion, even somewhat a little bit of happiness, just because we felt like maybe we were in the right spot.
All right. Your Honor, I'm at a convenient stopping point. I do need to make a record as well
That's
prior
fine.
to 5 p.m.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break at this point for the rest of the day. You know my admonitions, and I'll probably quit reading them to you at some time, but I'm going to go through them today. Please don't discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the course of the trial. Do not initiate, post, or respond to anything about the case on social media. In fairness to the parties of the lawsuit, you should keep an open mind throughout the trial and reach your deliberation only during final decision, or reach your decision only during your final deliberations. Do not permit any third person to discuss this case in your presence. If they persist in doing so, please report that to me. Do not attempt to gather any information on your own. Do not engage in any outside reading on this case. Do not visit any places mentioned in the case. Do not read about the case in the newspaper, obtain information about it from the radio, television, internet, social media, or any other media source. Do not in any way try to learn about the case outside courtroom conditions. We'll go with the same as we've been doing. I want you back at 10 to 8. Hopefully we'll start right at 8 or a few minutes thereafter. We'll go to about 5:15 tomorrow. So we do have a couple questions to ask you, Mr. Stein, if you want to stay behind for just a short period of time while everybody else is leaving. And then when we're done, since you're going to be gone, Cindy, I'll accompany Mr. Stein down or have a recording for you. Okay? All right. Everybody right to the jury, please? And you can step down, Ms. Golbricht. You don't have to stay for this if you don't want to. So we can be seated. So, Mr. Stein, first of all, thank you for speaking up about what you noticed. I guess no good deed goes unpunished because you're still here. In any event, you indicated to the bailiff that you were familiar with or you knew Mr. Thank you, Patterson. I was going to call him by a different name. It was going to be totally wrong. Could you describe that a little bit for us? Okay. So you didn't know him well enough to recognize the name then? Anything about the nature of that relationship that's going to cause you to give his testimony either greater or less weight than you would other witnesses? And I had another question, just a second, I lost it. Could you describe, in terms of walking by him, I mean, was that pretty much it? You didn't actually work with him other than him doing security, is that? Okay, all right. Does either side wish to inquire? One question. Sure.
If Mr. Patterson's testimony, to your recollection, doesn't match another witness's testimony, that's contradictory, based upon working in this, as you've described, with Mr. Patterson, are you more inclined to believe Mr. Patterson's testimony just because of that prior relationship or prior seeing him every day at work?
Okay. And I'm assuming there's not going to be any motions? Is that fair to say or not?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll be in recess till tomorrow. I want you to work on the exhibits because we have so many today, and then I'll come back and work with you. So I'll take Mr. Stein down just to make sure he gets in and out of the building.
All right.
Yes. Oh, sure.
We got a juror here if we're going to start making records.
Can you do it in the morning? All right, well then, can you just wait outside for me? Record can reflect the deputy's gonna go out with him just to make sure he doesn't get contacted by anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. I'll be brief. I'm sure the court was surprised on the objection and then surprised that objection.
Sure.
Rule 902 reads as follows: extrinsic evidence of authenticity. Extrinsic evidence of authenticity as a condition precedent to admissibility is not required with respect to the following. That's in CRE 902. Go down to 11 and explain that the original duplicate domestic records for each subject, the admissible the discovery. And finally, it says a party intending to offer a record in evidence under this paragraph must provide written notice of that intention to all adverse parties, and must make the record and affidavit available for inspection sufficiently in advance of their offering of evidence to provide an adverse party a fair opportunity to challenge.
Your Honor, if I may, we'll
No,
stipulate
wait,
all that.
hold on,
I
hold on.
agree.
No, not yet. I mean, I'm agreeing too, so far. But the rule doesn't say anything about that they have to object in advance, and I didn't know if there's any case law on it, is there?
No, Judge, I was unable to find a case directly on this time of objection. However, what I can tell the court is that the whole purpose of the rule of the objection is practice. The purpose is that you be finding custodians.
Well, I understand all that. I understand all that. My problem is the attestation says, this is the record attached. It's not attached, and it has no other identifying, documents or way to identify it, and that's what my problem is.
I understand, they come electronic. But that's not, I can tell the court that when we filed the notice that what we're saying in the notice is that the records were coming from our expectation is in advance for a trial objection. So we filed this back in March of 2020. We filed multiple updates. Just for those reasons, we do the objection time. Well, that reality of the situation, I know that listed on that, but divided in defense, the defense on page 18 of 646 discovery.
So where does it say CenturyLink on the declaration of the custodian? Because I looked for that, and maybe it does say it, I missed it. I was looking at the body of it.
And so, Judge, we could go witness by witness and call the investigators that see fit, but the purpose of the notice is that it's an objection to all that stuff. You know, our additional witnesses, et cetera. So I'm just asking the court to review that we give that notice, whether it's an objection to time, whether the witness had it in discovery for probably years. We'd like to proceed with that trial, but not that introduction. So I'm just flagging it now, and court will correct me about all.
Right. I will state that it's been 19 years that I've been a judge, almost 19 years. And back in the old days, they were always attached, which is why I didn't know they were coming now electronically, just to keep them from being attached. And are you stating as an officer of the court that this is the attestation for these records from CenturyLink?
Yes, Your Honor. And I believe that any that we, and counsel corroborate is accurate, but my understanding is Captain Bell followed that it was something that has the time of make sure that you get an attestation of specific records. The other investigation we can proceed to go after that. But any that we put in matter of notice.
And the rule actually talks about a company, it doesn't talk about attached, it's just this attestation. So, Mr. Moran, anything that you want to say about whether or not it should have been this?
No, I mean, I think that the notice is so that we can prepare to meet it if it's properly provided. What we've got is what was handed to us in the middle of this examination, well, unless we dig through. Are we at thousands of pleadings yet? At any rate.
Well, you're at 18,646 in terms of discovery numbers, which I agree is probably a couple of years old. And I don't know how high they went. I know it went up above 25,000.
Above 28,000 now, I think. So, at any rate, that document by itself tells us nothing, and that's what was handed to us in the middle of that examination, and it's not connected to anything, and for Ms. Redwine's sake, I'm not in the business of stipulating to that kind of thing.
Can you tell me what Mr. Johnson or Mr. Champagne, I don't care who has the records, what are the discovery numbers of the records?
I have it here, Judge. But I would also note,
Could you answer my question, and then you can say what you want to say? Maybe.
If I may,
No, I want this question answered and then we can talk.
18,646 to 18,654.
So it's right next to each other, I just have it. It's coming in.
understood. My record is that the declaration's got to be signed in a manner that, if falsely made, would subject the maker to a criminal penalty. Sorry, Aaron. And that the notice requirement is to provide fair opportunity to challenge properly attested documents. And
Right.
that's not what we've got, so that's the basis of our objection.
Well, that's a slightly different objection, but 335 is under penalty of perjury. It's sworn before a notary, and it's also cites 28 USC 1746, which I don't know what it says, but I assume that's something important. So with that, 335 will go in as a court exhibit, and 334, 336, I don't remember which one. Thank you, they're both admitted. And as soon as I do that, we'll be off the record. So we are off the record.
Thank you, Judge. Just, I'm sorry, to briefly
I
complete.
guess we're back on the record.
I apologize, Your Honor. Just to complete this process, there are going to be several other sets of records coming in under this same
I
exact process.
think I've made clear what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. Put your on his way. So I'll take care of this. Thank you very much.